to make it clear, when I talk about hidden injuries of modernity, I'm not talking about mobile phones um, or Facebook or driving too many cars. And indeed, modernity is not anchored to time. It doesn't mean recent. It means certain structural features of a civilization, which actually in the West go back a very long way. And the hidden injury I'd like to talk about now, which is what in a way is talked about by Karl Popper when he talks about the open society and its enemies. I can't resist a joke of Ernest's, which is that he described Popper, who he knew very well and disliked personally, but admired intellectually, as the, the open society by one of its enemies. Anyway, uh, so I'm talking about a feature, a structural feature, which is actually very old, at least 2,500 years old. It goes back to at least the Greeks. It's embedded in Greek thought, which in many ways, there were various strands, and the one Popper didn't like was Plato, but there was the other strand, which is Socrates and others, which has a questioning of certainty, an openness about it, which becomes embedded in Western philosophic traditions and is what I really want to talk about. So you go back to very early roots, and then you go skipping forward a couple of thousand years um, to the 16th century. It's very clear that this streak is strongly present there. Just to take two examples, one is Montaigne. Montaigne in his essays is highly relativistic. He says we have no certainty, basically. In a famous essay of coaches, I think, he says that if you take morality, for example, there is no fundamental morality which all societies subscribe to. As he says, you just turn the compass, you turn the world round, and you go to civilizations which turn all our categories and all our assumptions about morality upside down. And there's a wonderful passage there. So Montaigne was a very open thinker, and you find it also in Pascal. And you just have to read Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare is full of doubts and uncertainties and contradictions, and a very open thinker. And much of Western philosophy is like that. We'll come back to it. So basically, when jesting Pilate said in the trial of Jesus Christ, he was asked to look at the truth, and he said, "What is truth?" and laughed. You know, there has been this streak which questions truth. And indeed, anthropologists have, once they started to work on other societies, found that the idea, the very concept of truth, as opposed to falsehood, is a very Western category. You don't find it in many societies. For example, in many societies, you don't have a word for truth, a single word for truth. There are many words for truth because it depends what kind of truth you're talking about. Are you talking about referential truth? That is, it is the daytime now, or I am talking to you. That is a referential truth. Or are we talking about social truth? For example, if someone said, "Did you talk to Richard Marshall this morning?" And there was a good reason why I shouldn't. And I knew that it would, for example, hurt them to know that I was talking to Richard Marshall when I should have been talking to them. I say, "No, of course I wasn't talking to Richard Marshall." Well, that's a social truth because I'm taking social considerations into account. So there are levels and layers of truth, and they are different. So a thing can be true in one respect and not in another. And when you get to Eastern philosophies, there is absolutely no boundary between fact and fiction, as it were, or truth and falsehood in, for example, Taoism or Confucianism or Buddhism. They merge these, and in the symbol of yin and yang, which represents it, there is something of the other always. So you don't have categorical distinctions between truth and falsehood. That's an obsession of Western thought for various reasons. For example, if you said to someone in 17th century China, in our legal system, we get people to stand up in court and we say, please tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They would just laugh. They'd say, how ridiculous. How can you expect anyone to say that? Because obviously they wouldn't, because it would, if they said certain things, it would damage their family anyway. So you can't expect them to do that. And anyway, what is it? It's all on a continuum. It's partial. It's more or less true rather than false. And this, I was thinking, it's an explanation why, for example, in Eastern thought, there's no concept of heresy. Now, heresy plays a huge part in Western thought. Much of what we've discussed, the sort of attack on various kinds of heretics from the Albigensians right through to modernity, assumes that there is a truth and then there are heretics who have deviated from it. There is no concept of that in China because there is no true religion and there's no fundamental set of facts and truths. Now, we talked about that before in relation to science and the difficulty that Needham saw in the development of science in China, because there is no, as Needham said, illusion, Maya, in Buddhist philosophy, is mixed up. Illusion and delusion and reality are all mixed together. So it's a very old argument that has been going on in Western thought. And indeed, it has been exacerbated in recent years. And perhaps I can now turn to ways in which this confusion and tension between absolutes in the way of truth and science and so on, and a much more relativistic view has been expressed in all sorts of themes and strands in Western thought in the last few hundred years. Okay.
Yeah, that